What if the future didn't discriminate based on race, religion, or wealth, but on whether your parents could afford to genetically modify you before birth? What if being born naturally made you a second-class citizen in your own world? Welcome back to Depthline, where every story has depth. Director Timo Vuorensola brings us Altered, a dystopian science fiction thriller starring Tom Felton in a role that shatters his Draco Malfoy image. This 87-minute film blends the genetic discrimination of Gattaca with the kinetic action of Upgrade. Set in an alternate present where nuclear war reshaped humanity and genetic modification became the norm, Altered tells the story of Leon, a mechanic living in the slums who gets caught in a revolution he never wanted. Released in November 2025 by Wellgo USA Entertainment after premiering at Cannes, this scrappy film proves you don't need hundreds of millions to tell a compelling story about inequality and resistance. Years ago, multiple nations launched devastating nuclear missiles at each other, effectively destroying civilization. The film opens with a brief but essential exposition dump explaining the world we're about to enter. Years ago, multiple nations launched devastating nuclear missiles at each other, effectively destroying society as we knew it. In the aftermath, humanity rebuilt itself around a revolutionary discovery, the Genesis tree. This massive organic structure absorbs nuclear material from the contaminated atmosphere and transforms it into pure energy, which it stores in glowing blossoms called Genesis flowers. These flowers became humanity's most valuable resource, powering cities and vehicles while providing the foundation for genetic research. Scientists discovered they could use Genesis flower energy to perform genetic modifications on fetuses in the prenatal stage, enhancing strength, speed, immune systems, and healing abilities. These modified humans, called genetics, came to dominate every aspect of society. They're stronger, faster, healthier, and live in gleaming high-tech cities filled with silver metal and blue glass architecture that looks like something out of 1980s sci-fi visions of the future. But 10% of the population couldn't undergo these modifications due to biological incompatibilities. These unmodified humans, mockingly called specials, are treated like society's scum and forced to live in underground districts with crumbling infrastructure and zero access to the technology that defines modern life. It's a familiar story of haves and have-nots, but the genetic twist makes the playing field impossibly lopsided. The genetics literally possess superhuman abilities, while the specials remain baseline human. Enter Leon, played by Tom Felton with a grease-stained, quietly furious intensity that's worlds away from his Harry Potter days. Leon is a mechanic in the specials district, a man who fixes things because it's the only thing he can control in a world designed to crush people like him. He's not a revolutionary, not a fighter, not even particularly interested in changing the system. He just wants to survive another day and take care of his adopted niece Chloe, played by Elizaveta Bugalova, as the film's emotional backbone and true believer in the cause. Leon and Chloe infiltrate a Genesis Institute on what appears to be a simple job. Leon poses as a maintenance worker, while Chloe pretends to be a student on a field trip. Their actual mission involves stealing Genesis flowers, the valuable energy source that powers the genetic elite's world. But during the heist, something goes catastrophically wrong. A containment breach triggers facility lockdown, and chaos erupts as alarms blare and security forces converge. In the confusion, Leon and Chloe barely escape with their lives and a handful of Genesis flowers. But they also inadvertently become witnesses to something far more sinister. A secret medical facility where Senator Frank Kessler, a prominent politician played by Richard Brake with chilling charisma, is orchestrating experiments on specials. The facility is harvesting brain matter from unwilling subjects, conducting brutal research in pursuit of forced genetic modifications. Now Kessler pushes Proposition 42, a bill that would legalize postnatal genetic experimentation on specials. It's marketed as giving specials an opportunity to become genetics, but the reality is darker. It would legalize forced experimentation, allowing the government to use specials as test subjects. Kessler publicly announces that Leon is his special son, using this revelation to rally support for the proposition. The propaganda works brilliantly, and most of the population votes in favor. Leon finds himself drawn into a revolution against his will, but Chloe and other specials convince him that someone must stop Kessler. Using his mechanical skills and stolen Genesis flower technology, Leon constructs a makeshift exosuit, a jerry-rigged version of the sleek military-grade armor worn by genetic elites. His suit is cobbled together from scavenged parts, held together with welds and hope, but it gives him the physical abilities to fight back. Chloe becomes Leon's partner, pushing him forward when his cynicism threatens to pull him back. She's lived her entire life in the Specials District, seen friends disappear into Kessler's facilities, and she's willing to die to stop this oppression. Leon also encounters Mira, another special who believes Kessler genuinely wants to help. She betrays Leon's plans to the senator, nearly destroying the resistance, but eventually realizes Kessler's true nature. The climax centers on a desperate raid on Kessler's secret medical facility. Leon, Chloe, and a small group of specials infiltrate the compound to rescue prisoners scheduled for experimentation. The action sequences are scrappy and kinetic, Leon's makeshift armor sparking and malfunctioning, forcing him to rely on ingenuity rather than raw power. Inside, they discover the full horror of Kessler's crimes. Row after row of specials strapped to medical tables, their skulls opened, their brains harvested for research. It's eugenics programs, dressed up in the language of scientific progress. The rescue operation becomes a running battle through corridors as genetic security forces close in. Leon fights with the desperation of someone who knows he's outmatched, his suit taking damage that threatens to leave him defenseless. Chloe covers his back, proving herself every bit as capable, despite lacking any enhancements. The confrontation between Leon and Senator Kessler is the emotional core of the finale. Kessler reveals that his obsession with genetic modification stems from his inability to accept that his son was born imperfect. He views Leon's natural birth as a failure, a stain on his legacy. In Kessler's twisted logic, forcibly modifying Leon would be an act of love, fixing what nature failed to do. Leon rejects this worldview completely. He tells his father that he's not the one who's sick, that Kessler's inability to love his son as he is reveals the true sickness in their society. Felton makes Leon's quiet fury feel earned rather than melodramatic. This isn't a superhero speech. It's a son finally standing up to an abusive father. The raid succeeds in exposing Kessler's conspiracy just as police arrive. The evidence is undeniable: tortured victims, illegal experiments, falsified research data. But Kessler escapes capture in the chaos, slipping away before authorities can arrest him. The film doesn't give us the satisfaction of seeing the villain face justice. In the aftermath, the government repeals Proposition 42 under public pressure. The segregation policies that kept specials confined to ghettos are officially ended, though the film makes it clear that changing laws doesn't immediately change hearts. Genetic supremacy is deeply embedded in this society, and true equality will require generations of struggle. A news broadcast shows footage of the raid, featuring a mysterious masked vigilante in mechanical armor who saved lives and exposed the conspiracy. Some speculate this vigilante might be Senator Kessler's estranged son, but officials deny these rumors. The broadcast treats Leon like an urban legend, a symbol of resistance whose true identity remains unknown. The final scene shows Leon and Chloe in the Specials District, which looks marginally less oppressive now that official segregation has ended. Small victories. Electricity reaches buildings that were dark before. Supplies arrive that were previously restricted. But Leon spots his father Kessler in the crowd, watching him from a distance. The senator hasn't given up on his son or his twisted vision of genetic perfection. The threat remains. Altered is a film that wears its B-movie heart on its sleeve while delivering sharp social commentary. Director Timo Vorensola works within the limitations of his modest budget to create a world that feels lived in despite rough edges. Tom Felton brings vulnerability and blue-collar grit to Leon. Elizaveta Bugolova makes Chloe the film's heart, and Richard Brake is appropriately smarmy as Senator Kessler, a villain who genuinely believes he's doing good while perpetrating atrocities. The film's 87-minute runtime keeps things moving at a brisk pace, though some critics note this brevity leaves certain plot threads underdeveloped. The romance between Leon and Mira feels rushed, and some action sequences are shot so frantically that it's hard to follow. But these flaws are easy to forgive in a film that clearly had more ambition than budget. What works best about Altered is its commitment to its central metaphor. Genetic modification as class divider isn't subtle, but the film doesn't pretend to be subtle. It's angry about inequality and willing to show that anger through pulpy sci-fi action. In an era where the gap between rich and poor continues widening, where access to healthcare and technology increasingly determines life outcomes, Altered's vision of genetic haves and have-nots feels uncomfortably plausible. If this breakdown of Altered got you thinking about genetic inequality and scrappy underdogs fighting impossible odds, make sure to subscribe to Depthline. We bring you in-depth analyses of films that challenge the status quo and refuse to play it safe. New breakdowns drop every week, diving deep into the stories that deserve more attention. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling us whether you think genetic modification will create new forms of inequality in our future. And remember, sometimes the most powerful revolutions start with ordinary people who refuse to accept their assigned place in society. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next breakdown.